King Charles, says the headlines in The Guardian, and different newspapers, as I said, I read all across the whole landscape of press. King Charles is to receive a huge pay rise from UK taxpayers, apparently. Details published by the Treasury show the royal family's grant is expected to increase from 86 million to 125 million in 2025. I had a very robust conversation with an ITV newsreader about this a few years ago. More of that later. Now, King Charles III is to receive a huge pay rise from the UK taxpayer, according to the government plans to boost public funding of the monarchy by 45% from 2025. Now, obviously, it comes against the backdrop of the cost of living crisis. Next year, the sovereign grant will remain unchanged at 86.3 million. What do you think about 86.3 million? That's the first question I'm going to ask you. However, in 2025, the King's public funding will increase by a projected 38.5 million, giving the monarchy an annual stipend of 124.8 million. In 2026, it's going to be 126 million pounds. The monarchy's annual budget, known as a sovereign grant, is pegged against the profits from a national property portfolio called the Crown Estate, and it is very, very complicated. I'm simplifying things. The review of the royal funding settlement was heavily spun by the Treasury. So says people like one of my next guests, Graham Smith, who's the chief executive of the anti-monarchy group Republic. He was arrested, if you recall, while attempting to peacefully protest at King Charles's coronation. He's described the way the Treasury has put this out as grossly misleading. And where, as I said, when you bore down to it, I'm a bit gobsmacked. I didn't realise that the King at the moment, it's 86.3 million, and it's going to go up to eventually being 126 million pounds in 2026. What do you think about that? Do you think that's fair? That's right? Or do you look at 126 million and think that could go somewhere else? Maybe some of the kings could sell off some of the property. We've got two people here. I think they have very different views. Joining me now is both Portia Berry-Kilby, who's political commentator with Young Voices UK, and Graham Smith, who I'm going to start off with, CEO of the Republic. Graham, I was a little bit gobsmacked that it's that much and it's set to rise. What are your feelings on this?
I think it's appalling. I think it's absolutely shocking. I mean, I'd say that the sovereign grant is one part of the cost of the monarchy to the taxpayer. The calculations that we've done over the years puts it at £345 million. So it's going to be hitting 400 million.
How do you make it? How do you make it that? Well, while you throw that figure out there, how did you come to that figure?
£100 million estimate, at least, of a hugely bloated security bill. They charge local councils whenever they, or they cost local councils whenever they go around the country. I've just found out that Colchester spent about £6,000 for the King turning up there a few months ago. And some of that's quite a small bill for a local council. Unpaid taxes and the revenues from the two duchies, which, like the Crown Estate, are not private property, but are Crown assets and state assets, and should be sending their money into the Treasury, but instead pay Charles and William around £24 million each as private income, in addition to the sovereign grant. And I would say that, the sovereign grant was about £40 million about 7 or 8 years ago. They put it up to around £80+ million in order to do this massive refurbishment of Buckingham Palace. And they said it will stay like that for about 10 years and then it'll go back down again. And instead of going back down again, it's jumping up by about 45%.
So let me just clarify with you. I didn't realise. So when the royals visit any town, any city, they don't. So I'm guessing they pay for their own security. Well, we pay for them to pay for their own security. But then the town, what is the town paying for? Just what, nibblies and wine or security, what?
All sorts of things. I mean, back in 2012, when the Queen went to Leicester, between the university there, the police and the council, it was £180,000 for a 4-hour visit. And when she went to Romsey a little bit earlier than that, a few years earlier, it was about £60,000 out of the town council's budget, which wiped out their reserves. So it can be really, really expensive to have a royal visit your town, particularly if it's the actual monarch or the heir.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me come to Portia Berry-Kilby, because not everybody will agree with you, Graham. Portia, do you hear these figures and think, that's okay, it's money well spent?
Well, I think what's being missed out here is that the sovereign grant, the percentage that King Charles used to have, which was 25%, is being more than halved to 12%. And this is in part because if he were to keep it at 25%, the increase would be significantly more than what it is. It would be more than the 40 million. But this is because the profits of the Crown estates have done exceptionally well. So it seems if they had done exceptionally poorly, he would be losing money, or they'd be increasing the percentage he gets. But instead, it's made profit. He's taking a lower percentage. That all, to my mind, seems perfectly fair and reasonable.
So do you think I mean, I didn't realise until Graham said, but do you think it's fair and just that if King Charles comes to your local town, that money is taken from your council pays taxpayers' money to accommodate that visit? Do you think that this money that we're talking about is money well spent and that the monarchy's worth it? So we should all basically just shut up.
I think the monarchy is worth it, and I think a lot of people also agree. And if you have a royal coming to your town, that's going to boost trade for various businesses in that town. And at the end of the day, if it's 120 million from a sovereign grant in a couple of years' time going towards the royals, then that's roughly £5 per person in the UK. I think a lot of people would be willing to pay a lot more than £5 to have the pomp and circumstance that the monarchy brings.
Well, I mean, it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. The sovereign grant, the fact that you've cut the percentage is neither here nor there. They should, and it won't go down. If the profits of the Crown estate drop to zero, the grant will not fall because there's a golden ratchet clause in the law which says it cannot go down below what it was in the previous law. So once it hits 125, 130 million pounds, it can't go down from that. Unless Parliament changes the law to allow that to happen.
But
you
Graham,
cannot justify simply...
I was going to say a fiver a person doesn't sound extortionate.
Yeah, but you don't justify something like this by dividing it by every man, woman and child in the country. You don't go up to every 10-year-old and say, look, give us a fiver so we can pay for Charles, the billionaire. The point is, if you look at the £345 million, you could get 13,000 new nurses or give 100,000 nurses a big pay rise. That's the sort of thing that we could be spending on it. So the question is, this is taxpayers' money, so it doesn't come from the Crown estate. The Crown is simply pegged to it. And as I said in an article with The Guardian today, it makes no sense at all to peg it to the Crown estate profits. You may as well peg it to the profits of McDonald's or EasyJet for all the sense it makes. And so this extra 40 million isn't because they budgeted and they worked out they need it. It's simply that the Crown estate profits go up, and so they get more money. And they should be reducing they should be scrapping this system and putting them on a proper budget.
Oh, you think so? So what would and I'd love Portia to hear this. What would a quote-unquote proper budget look like?
Well, below £10 million. I mean, the point is, if you look at the Irish president, who does the same sort of job, although he does it independently of the Prime Minister of Ireland, and he does it with certain reserve powers which are actually useful, unlike the King, his budget for the year is around €4 million. And, his security is not bloated. He hasn't got a huge extended family.
So let me put that to Portia. Let me put that to Portia. Portia, do you think that the King and the royals could operate on a lot less? Like heads of state, like presidents?
Well, first of all, I must apologise for my maths, which was woefully off, because if it's 125 million, it's only £2 a person, and more like a fiver a person if we're taking Graham's figure of more than around 300,000 million. But I think, if you ask the general public who is the Prime Minister of Ireland, most of them probably don't even know, let alone does anyone travel to Ireland for the excitement of the Prime Minister of Ireland. I don't think it's any revenue into Ireland, unlike the royals.
So you're saying with the royals, they're a tourist attraction so that they bring money into the country?
Totally. And I think it uplifts people's spirits. When we had the coronation, when we had the Jubilee, even the funeral for her late Majesty brought a lot of people together, and people were happy to see that.
The evidence doesn't bear that out, unfortunately. Only 9% were enthusiastic about the coronation. The crowds were way lower than they were for the Jubilee even
Well,
last year,
it was pouring with rain.
11 years ago. Sorry?
It was pouring with rain.
Well, it was pouring with rain. I was out protesting in 2012 at the pageant, and there was 1 million people estimated to be down there. There's about a few 100,000 people there for the coronation. So I don't think the rain.
But what about, Graham, does it bring money in as far as tourism's concerned?
Well, no, this is the big myth, and there's no evidence of this whatsoever. And I've looked for evidence. I've asked to Visit Britain for evidence. 11 years ago, I had a meeting with the CEO and chair of Visit Britain, and they didn't have any evidence. And I said to them, if the bottom line is, if you get rid of the monarchy, you don't get a drop in tourism. And they said, yes, you're absolutely right. There's no evidence.
Really?
Of this. And even if there was, that does not mean that we throw tens of millions of pounds at a very wealthy family instead of spending that money on hospitals and schools and extra police officers. That's what we should be spending our money on, not on Charles, who is now a billionaire, having not paid any inheritance tax when his mother died.
Yeah, let me come back to you, Portia. What about that? That money could go towards nurses, doctors, much needed help as far as the National Health Service is concerned, and King Charles not paying inheritance tax when the rest of us over 1 million have to. What about that? Is that not unfair?
Well, I don't think in terms of Buckingham Palace, it's not just for the king, it's for the future royals, and it's open to the public. We can benefit from it from time to time.
But we pay to go into a lot of these places. Windsor Castle, we pay even more money to go in there, as well as our taxes. Isn't that enough? Just us paying?
Well, I think it's also subsidised. If you were going to pay for it and it was going to be break even, it would probably be a lot more money. But I think at the end of the day, it's the amount of money that the royals are given. It comes from profits of the Crown estates. And in the whole grand scheme of things of public spending, it is pittance. Public spending was over 1,000 billion last year. And now we're talking about 80 million, 120 million.
14 years ago, we were complaining about MPs abusing MPs' expenses to the tune of a few £100, a few £1,000, £10,000. And we were outraged by it. And some of them lost their seats and some of them went to jail. We look at the King and look at William spending tens of millions of pounds on their own personal private travel, on their own personal private homes, and everyone just excuses it. Why should we allow, it doesn't matter what you think of the monarchy as an institution, why should we be throwing £40 million extra on top of the already £80 million and the £100 million security and all the other costs? Why should we be allowing them to take any more money at all when we have schools struggling to buy resources, to employ good teachers? We don't have enough police on the streets. No, it is obscene.
All right, last word to you, Poppy. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Portia, last word to you, Portia.
I mean, this is profit of the Crown estates, and this is going to the king. We're not stealing money from the taxpayer. This hasn't reached the taxpayer.
No,
yet.
It's government money. It's government money.
And people are happy to have the royals and happy to spend £2, or the equivalent of public spending being that £2 going towards keeping the royal family and letting them do their public duties, enabling them to have the public to have the opportunity to see them, to meet them, to have their support and patronage for various charities. And that brings a lot of joy to a lot of people. And let's happy
Portia,
to have.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. We've got to end it there, Portia and Graham. I want to thank you, and I think you've started off a really interesting debate.